Global issues such as climate emergency, public health, trade, and security have demonstrated that African actors are not passive agents in international relations. Far too often, our continent has been framed as a place acted upon, not as a diverse continent with an evolving agenda of its own. However, the increasing visibility of African leaders and experts in international organizations is bringing African narratives and interests into the mainstream, where communication can amplify their voice. We believe that strategic comms plays a fundamental role in improving the capabilities of African actors to exert various levels of agency and increasingly set terms of engagement. This is the reason why I launched Africa Comms in 2017. As communication professionals passionate about the continent and its transformation, we realized that too many of our colleagues working in and around African issues were working in silos, and this needs to change. We needed collaboration, we needed a collective, a movement, if you will, and that is what Africa Comms is all about. Comms experts have a voice, they have resources, and they have networks. We need to be strategic and intentional about how we are deliberately shaping a narrative that is so vital to the transformation of the continent. It is our hope that through our engagement and discussion today, we can come up with a clear action roadmap for how strategic communication can reinforce Africa's assertiveness and engagement on the global stage, even as the world emerges from the COVID-19 pandemic and moves towards economic recovery. And since today, we're counting on you for your engagement, your participation, and your insights. Thank you so much. I did over to you.
Thank you very much, Eniola. Please, a round of applause to Eniola. And as Eniola had mentioned, one of the things we're going to achieve today from the conversations, the roundtable, is to have practical next steps on how we can move forward with this agenda that we've set this morning. Now I'm going to move on to the next speaker, and this is for the keynote address. And I would like to welcome Yolande Makolo. But before I do that, I'll just introduce her briefly. And Yolande Makolo has been the spokesperson for the government of Rwanda since July 2021. And previously, she served as communications advisor and speechwriter for the president of Rwanda. Before that, she was communications director in the office of the president, and for 3 years, starting in 2003, she served as communications director and then coordinator of PACFA, now Imbuto Foundation, of the First Lady of Rwanda. Ladies and gentlemen, please let's welcome Yolande Makolo. Okay, she's in progress. All right, here she is. Please let's welcome her once again. Good morning, welcome.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Does this mic work? This one? Or should I use this one? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So, sorry for that unceremonious entrance. I can't remember where I first read this because it's definitely not original, but I say it to my colleagues all the time. When comms becomes the story, we have failed. So I must tell you that I did hesitate at first a little to accept your invitation, your very kind invitation. Thank you, Autumn. But I'm here. I'm here because I think what you're doing and what we're all doing is critical. Good morning, everyone. So first of all, a very warm welcome to all our friends who are joining us from afar. I understand that we have professional colleagues here from Benin, Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, Nigeria, Zambia. Did I forget anyone? Anyway, I hope you're all here. And of course, I see very many familiar faces. My tribe. So welcome everybody, welcome to Kigali, welcome to Rwanda. I hope Comms Week is going well. I don't know why no one invited me to Bichu Lounge last night. I don't know who's to blame for that. Okay, let's blame Autumn. But I heard it was fun. It's a pleasure to be with you to talk about promoting African agency on the global stage. One of my favorite quotes by my president, President Paul Kagame, and I have it on my Twitter bio for daily inspiration, is what we have set out to do is not for the half-hearted, let alone the heartless. What we have set out to do is not for the half-hearted, let alone the heartless. So he said this in a totally unscripted speech a few years ago while closing our annual leaders retreat, Umuherero, as you know, some of you know. For me, this sentence describes the story and the spirit of the new Rwanda. It speaks to what drove the young women and men who liberated this country in 1994. It also speaks to the fearless nation builders who painstakingly put this country back together again. They buried the bodies, they swept the streets and the offices, they rebuilt the schools and the hospitals, they integrated the army, they brought back refugees. They were determined that Rwanda must not perish or become a United Nations protectorate after what had happened here in 1994. They insisted that we must all stay together as Rwandans, no matter what side of the conflict we were from. That is the story of Rwanda. And we know that there are communities and countries from across our continent who are working to overcome huge challenges, building anew, innovating, creating wealth, generating hope. But for many reasons, this is not the dominant narrative on Africa, even among ourselves, even among ourselves. Let me tell you another story. As early as around 1996, public relations companies were already approaching the new post-genocide government of Rwanda, offering to do PR and lobbying for a fee. The response to them at the time was, what story are we trying to tell here? What story are we going to tell in 1996? Yes, the genocide against the Tutsi had been stopped. The government that planned and carried out this genocide had been defeated and had fled across the border. But it was not a victory because no one won. We lost over 1 million people. So we politely said no to these international PR companies and only started working with some of them later in the 2000s. But by then, Rwanda had a different story to tell. This country had become secure and stable. Rwandans were back in their homes, at work, across the country. We were building institutions that had never existed before. We were working on delivering not just justice, but reconciliation. And we were doing this as Rwandans, together, against all odds, and with partners that understood and supported our vision. So we had a story to tell, and we were comfortable working with these professionals to tell this story to the world. We wanted people to visit, to do business here, to invest, and even more important, build confidence among Rwandans that we were a normal country and we were part of the global community with something to offer. This complex history doesn't fit neatly within the frames of reference that, mostly Western mainstream media tells about Africa. And all too often, the story of our continent, has been framed by outsiders looking in. This is changing, thanks in a large part, for example, to the collective endeavor of those of you in this room, and other communicators, artists, and activists from across Africa who are taking back control of our narrative. We're learning not only to list the things that we do or have done, but bringing it together into a coherent narrative that reflects our reality. We're telling the story of where we have come from, where we're going, and what values drive us. We're telling the story of how we live, how we love, how we work, and what we bring to the global table. As a government, we're learning a lot from communications professionals, from Rwanda, from the continent, and beyond. We understand that for a message to connect with people, it needs to be authentic. This is especially important in the age of social media where authenticity is cherished. So for example, we're working on conveying a message that is true to us. That is, Rwanda works. In Kinyarwanda, it is U Rwanda Mukazi. This may sound familiar to those of you who speak Swahili. I don't know how many are here. Same words. This simple message, Rwanda works, both promotes us as a nation, a work in progress, a nation at work, with the confidence of our experience and what we have gone through, as well as with the humility in the face of the great challenges that are still before us. So we're working to counter those who are either ignorant of Rwanda and Africa, those who assume an African nation couldn't really work, cannot really work, or those who question the credibility of our progress that we see with our naked eye. I know you all know how important it is to challenge those who try and distort how Africa is perceived in a bid to stifle investment, to deter tourists, and affect how we are understood by partners from across the world. It's also critical to counter those who seek to create division on our continent and perpetuate negative narratives about us because they fear a united and successful Africa, one with the confidence and ability to tell its own story. So this is what gets me out of bed every morning to tell Rwanda's story as the government spokesperson. So my message is we must not be deterred from our mission as communicators. If you allow, let me quote a famous American who is also one of our own, James Baldwin, who said, "You have to decide who you are and force the world to deal with you, not with its idea of you." So we must use our history and our experience, our passion, and our talents to our advantage. And each and every one of us have our part to play in telling our continent's true, authentic story. If we don't, then we will always be defined by others. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yolande, for that remarkable speech and really for giving us practical insights into how you're leveraging storytelling and communications to shape the narrative and experience that people have of the nation. Please, a round of applause once again for Yolande. Okay, so those of you that have been here, you will have seen the Basketball Africa League merch display. Who hasn't seen it? Who has seen it? It's everywhere, and we want to say thank you to BAL for their support. And I'm going to welcome Edwin Eselem, who is the Public Relations and Communications Lead, to come and give us a few remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and I want to say a special thank you to the Africa Communications team for honoring the Basketball Africa League here this morning, and for putting up this very important rendezvous for African communications professionals. And coming here this morning, I had the honor of having a chat with our good friend Otto Marie, and we have to work together to bring in more African communications professionals to this room, because this is one of the greatest rendezvous of communication professionals, and as professionals to uplift and connect other African communication professionals, we have to bring everyone into this room to participate in this conversation to uplift communications in Africa and to tell our own African stories. I've known few greater honors like this one to address a room of communication professionals and to quote the 44th President of the United States of America, Barack Obama. It's either the beginning of a very funny joke or a very high bar. And I want to thank you all for coming. As Yolan just mentioned, I understand there are communication professionals from all across Africa here this morning. Anyone from Rwanda, of course, Yolan, from Rwanda? From Rwanda? Great. Burkina Faso? Ghana? No one from Ghana. All right. And Nigeria? Those from Nigeria, can you please stand up? From Nigeria. Arise, O compatriots, Nigeria. Shall we? Arise, O compatriots, Nigeria's call obey, to serve our fatherland with love and strength and faith. The labor of our heroes past shall never be in vain. To serve with heart and mind, one nation bound in freedom, peace and unity. I'm from Cameroon. And that's to tell you about the African story. Let people not fool you about all these boundaries and all these roadblocks and what Yolanda was saying about, not telling the African story, changing our perceptions. And that's why we're here, and that's why this conversation is very important. On the sidelines of these Africa Communications Week, we are organizing the second expanded season of the Basketball Africa League. Last year, due to the pandemic, we organized our event here in Kigali in a bubble. But this year, we've had the exceptional opportunity to visit 3 iconic African cities. We're in Dakar from March 5 to 15th, in Cairo, Egypt from April 9 to 19th, and obviously here in Kigali. We started our competition on the 21st of May, and on the evening of Saturday, May 28th, at the world-class Kigali Arena, we're going to crown the second African champions, Basketball Africa League champions. The Basketball Africa League, as some of you may know, is part of the NBA's broader efforts to use basketball as an economic growth engine across Africa and as a platform to improve the health and wellness of one of the world's fastest and youngest populations, and that's the young people of this continent. We believe that basketball can become a top sport on the continent and that the BAL can be one of the top professional basketball leagues in the world in the next 10 years. We're committed, of course, to establishing the Basketball Africa League as a world-class professional basketball league, leveraging from the experience of the National Basketball Association and, of course, the world governing body for basketball, the Fédération Internationale de Basketball Association. It's very important because this is part of telling our African story, going to iconic African cities, leveraging on tourism, on sports, and the whole ecosystem around sport and basketball, tourism, media, technology, content creation. We are trying to build our own African stories. Kids in Cameroon, in Rwanda, in Nigeria, who have a very strong basketball tradition, get up at 2 a.m. in the morning to watch games of the Dallas Mavericks, the Golden State Warriors. But we are writing our own story on the continent with teams like Force Armée Police from Cameroon, US Monastir from Tunisia, Rwanda Energy Group from Rwanda, and all the great basketball teams. We want to build our own Joel Embiids, our own Pascal Siakams, and our own Giannis Antetokounmpos on this continent. That's why we created the Basketball Africa League. The African continent is unique and diverse, with a rich history, culture, and traditions. And the story the continent has, however, has been checkered, as Yolanda was saying, depending on who is telling the story and for which audience. Africa, especially in the eyes of the Western media, has focused on things going wrong, and we as communications professionals have to work together to right that wrong. And we're looking forward to exciting conversations here this morning. Thank you all for coming, and God bless you. And looking forward to seeing you in the Basketball Africa game this week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edwin. Please, another round of applause for him. And I'd like to use this time to remind us that we have an invitation from the BAL to the Innovation Summit and Games. I'm excited about that. Yes, yes. So if you don't want to miss it, please make sure you sign up, because if you don't sign up, you won't get to attend. You'll just be seeing us posting pictures, and I'm sure you won't be happy with that. Okay, so we're moving on next to our panel discussion, and I'm going to invite Annie Mutamba, who is the co-founder of Africa Comes Week, and she's the and she's going to be the moderator of the session.
Thank you. How are they doing? Hi, everyone. How are you doing? How is everyone today? I'm very happy, very excited to be here. Let me first enjoy the view. I wish you could see what I'm seeing. This is the first time in 5 years that Africa Communications Week, we organize our own flagship event. And thank you, Autumn Marie, for this fantastic collaboration. Thanks to everyone who decided that this is it. 5 years ago, this is it. It's time now to collaborate. We're done working in isolation in our own little corners. And thanks to that mindset change, we're now a global platform. We started this list of African countries, and somehow we stopped at Nigeria. But my colleague is from Côte d'Ivoire. I'm from the DRC. I know we have other colleagues in the room and more than 10 countries represented, and even more following us online. So this is clearly, our job to keep pushing for those connections, to keep building bridges. So this right here and what we see online, this is really, really powerful. I just wanted to underline that before we start our panel discussion, and thank you all for being here. And thank you to those who are following online. I would like to ask you to forgive my voice. I think I seem to have got a cold call. Okay, so you know that Africa Comes Week is a multilingual platform, right? And we really make a point to publish our content in different languages, starting with at least English and French. So when preparing for this session, when we had to translate agency, Africa's agency, into French, we actually struggled, and we got stuck, to be completely honest. I mean, for the Francophones in this room, if you try to translate, if you try to find the right word for Africa's agency in French, it's difficult. Or maybe the interpreters now have it all figured out. But basically, it led us to think, what does agency actually mean? Even in English, right? We kind of know, but what is it exactly? So let's start with a bit of vocabulary. In a nutshell, Africa agency would be the ability for a country or a group of countries to shape the course of international events. There's a war in Ukraine, followed by an energy crisis, probably followed by an upcoming food crisis that will likely impact millions of Africans. How do African nations react? Is it passive? Is it proactive? Is it now? Is it later? Is it out in the open, or is it behind closed doors? This concept of agency kind of dismisses the notion of Africa as a passive bystander or a victim in international relations, because I'm sure that narrative sounds familiar to you. So that's for the definition. And by the way, the French translation is agentivité. So l'agentivité africaine sur la scène internationale, that's the word we're going for. So this is a topic that's been on the rise over the past decade. If you Google it, Africa's Agency, you'll find tons, more and more articles and research pieces. So clearly it's been under scrutiny in the last years, especially through the lenses of international trade, climate change, public health, as we saw recently, global security, etc. Now, in this room, we all know that if we talk about promoting an agenda at the global level and positioning a country on certain international issues or topics, there's absolutely no way you can achieve that without strategic communication. So how can we help bring Africa's agenda and perspectives into international debates and arenas? I'm very glad to introduce our 4 speakers who will guide us through this discussion. Starting with Mimi Kalinda, who's following us online. She's joining online. She's the CEO of Africa Communications Media Group. Ms. Nkiru Balonwu, who's the founder of the Africa Soft Power Project, and I would like to invite her to join us here now. Diana MPC, CEO of Blue Oceans. And Emmanuel Munyarukurumzi, International Business and Trade Faculty at African Leadership University. Colleagues, welcome to your panel. Mimi, are you following us? I need to check. I need to do a tech check.
Absolutely,
first.
I can hear you loud and clear, Annie. Can you hear me?
She's online? Okay, in the past years, Mimi, can you hear us?
I can hear you loud and clear, Annie. Hi, everybody.
Awesome. Hi, welcome, Mimi. In the past years, we've seen quite a number of African countries increase their capabilities to really articulate their agenda and really promote it and somehow become more assertive. I think that's something we can all agree on, and I'm sure a few names come to mind. In parallel, we also see that the communication landscape is evolving and is constantly changing, from new communication channels to user habits, technology, fake news, use of different African languages. It's hard to keep up, but that's also our jobs, right, to keep up. And that takes me to my first question to you. Mimi, you are a seasoned communicator with a passion for storytelling. So can you help us understand what role storytelling and being extremely intentional about building a narrative can play in Africa's agency? Over to you.
Thanks, Annie. Thank you so much for having me. I have serious FOMO looking at everybody in the room. I really wish I was in Kigali. And I'd like to start off by just saying congratulations to you, to Eniola, to Autumn and the team for growing such an incredible platform. Having seen it from just an idea to where it is today, it's just so fulfilling to see all of our colleagues in the room and the conversations that we're able to have to build this what I think is a critical profession. So thank you so much. In terms of storytelling, I think that, storytelling, everybody in the room, I think, would agree, is a critical component to nation branding and nation positioning. Our previous speaker from the government of Rwanda highlighted the journey that the country that you're all in right now had to walk to build a narrative from the genocide to 2022 and the incredible things in between that Rwanda has been able to achieve. And the role of communications in that cannot be denied and needs to be highlighted. There was a story that led to the genocide, and then there was a story that helped Rwanda transition to the country that it is today and the perception that it creates in people's minds. For me, I think that a lot of the time our stakeholders, clients, nations, etc., expect behavior sometimes without putting emphasis on the role of story. So behavior is foreign direct investment, it's increasing tourism, it's, you know, building social cohesion within a country. But all of that starts with a story. So the way that I've always thought of it is, if you think of story and narrative at the beginning, those stories and narratives lead to perceptions, and those perceptions then lead to behavior and action on the part of stakeholders. I think one of the biggest challenges that we've had as a group and as a profession is being able to set clear metrics and then to be able to measure the impact of storytelling and communications in order to really drive, you know, specifically government, policymakers, etc., to really put storytelling at the fore. But I think COVID has changed a lot of that. I think COVID has led us to a place where we've had to make connections with one another. And we've had to rethink what kind of world do we want to live in, what kind of continent do we want to build post this pandemic. And I think that what used to be considered, I suppose, good to have, such as storytelling as part of brand building, are now becoming absolutely critical as we make the efforts to rebuild our economies. So, yeah, I think I'll leave it there for now, but I mean, you know, it goes without saying, and I think I'm preaching to the converted when I say that storytelling is really at the core, not only of what we do, but if we plan on getting out of this abyss that this terrible pandemic has caused to all economies around the world, as Africa, we really have to put storytelling at the core of what we do and take communications extremely seriously.
Thank you, Mimi. You touched upon the critical importance of building stories to start rebuilding our economies post-COVID, and I wonder how this, you know, relates to our capacity to influence. So let's take this a little further with you, Nkiru. If we wanted to take stock of the effects, the successes, and also obviously the shortcomings when it comes to, you know, building our African soft power, or soft power for African countries, where should we start?
So can you hear me? Yeah, great, thanks. First of all, I'm going to just say thank you for inviting me here.
I think the microphone is now working.
I can hear myself. Is this good?
Now it's better.
Yes. So I want to say thanks for inviting me here, and to Eniola and yourself. Doing an incredible job, and I'm so inspired by the work. I've been inspired by your work since I met you guys. But in terms of soft power, so we have an event here in Kigali, starting on Thursday and Friday, actually. And the whole idea around soft power is, how does Africa, what language does Africa speak to the world? And how do we promote ourselves and propel ourselves? When you're thinking about soft power, it's around, you know, persuasion and telling the world what you want the world to know of, you know, what you're doing. So an example would be Hollywood. A lot of us grew up knowing all the American stars. Every war, every movie you watched was about America's superheroes and how they saved the world. And so many of us, I'm from Nigeria, many of us, you know, grew up, you know, with MTV base. We grew up with American accents. All we knew was America because we saw it on TV. So we thought everything good came out of America because that's what we were told. I later on went to graduate school in the States, and I like to tell the story. When I got to California for the first time, I sort of landed in the hood, and I was traumatized because I'm Nigerian, but I'm also from a small space, and you know everybody, and it's beautiful where I live, and I'm in America, and it's in the hood, and I'm thinking, what is going on here? This is not the America that I know. This is not what I saw on MTV base. And then I realized, obviously, that it's about balance in stories. So everywhere has great stuff, and everywhere has not so good stuff. And what Africa has been receiving, I think both from ourselves and from the outside, is that we only talk about the things that are bad. So there's no balance to the storytelling when it comes to who we are. And it's not really just outsiders, it's also us. It's like when I went to Ghana a few weeks ago, and someone said, oh, this Nigerians, you know, and then you go to Kigali, you come to Rwanda, and someone says, oh, these Rwandese people. Even the way we see ourselves, I think we need to work on. before we start sort of like, talking about what outsiders are seeing of us, right? So the stories we tell about Africa, the stories about ingenuity, the youth, the amazing things that happen here that nobody tells for us is what we're trying to do with Africa Soft Power. So in terms of, storytelling, it's not about storytelling, it's about, there's amazing things. I mean, I'm in Kigali for 3 days, 4 days. The place is beautiful. It's almost crime-free. Like you're walking around at night and you're not worried. That's a beautiful story. Why do we always have to go outside? We're going to Davos, we're going to the UK, we're going to different places to convene. Why aren't we convening here? Why aren't we convening in African countries and promoting ourselves? And that's what we're trying to do with the Africa Soft Power Project.
Great, so you mentioned how do we promote ourselves, and that's obviously the big question, and I think an equally important question is, who is promoting? Who is promoting us? Who is promoting ourselves? Are we doing that ourselves? Can this be a Pan-African thing? Is this something where communicators can actually play a role? And is there any particular area where you think soft power can be, African soft power can be at its best?
I mean, I definitely think that we have to promote ourselves, and we have to also stand and say when people are saying things about us that's incorrect. I think what we haven't done effectively as Africans is actually to collaborate. There's so many silos of people doing great things. There's no cohesion. And I think that's one of the things we have to do. But we also have to call the international media to, we have to sort of say, stop. Like there has to be a balance in storytelling. But if we are not ourselves speaking up, if we are ourselves telling those stories and sort of saying, how like we're always negative about ourselves, then how are you actually going to compel somebody else to sort of say, come on, that's not, So the onus is on us to say these things, and, it's on private sector. I'm very keen on private sector participation in storytelling, because when people hear storytelling, they think it's just creatives, but private sector tells an incredible story if they mean to. So when you think about the American superhero that you're not thinking of just the movies, you're thinking about Netflix, you're thinking about Amazon, you're thinking about Google, that's American superheroism. What are the African superheroes when it comes to private sector? We have MTN, it's an indigenous company. What is MTN's role in the global conversation around Africa? How about, like all the amazing Safaricom? These are African companies. We need to sort of like propel them to the world stage. They need to also understand as private sector that the onus is on private sector to tell different stories about the continent.
Yeah. And I'd like to build on that, because you mentioned the private sector and other actors promoting the, our African agenda at the international level. We also have more African leaders in, leadership position in international organizations who are also making, more visible our narrative and making it more into the mainstream, and making sure that African interests are also represented at the highest level, and there's clearly a strategy behind that. So the question is really, who is we? When we say, we need to keep promoting, who is we? So let's start this, we try to unpack this, this concept, and this is a great segue for you, Diana, because I wanted to ask you, we understand that Africa's agency is multifaceted. It's also multi-actor, as Nkiru just said. We have the private sector, governments, obviously, but also civil society, also individuals, or organizations like this one here. So agencies usually exerted by governments, but with all these actors, what do you think is the place and the role for communicators and the communication industry in all this?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say I'm really honored to be here. Africa Comms Week, it's great to see communicators across the continent gathering to see how we can best really change the African narrative and its agency on the global stage. So it's really great. Met with some amazing communicators yesterday, so really looking forward to the deliberations of this week. That's a good question. I think that so I have more questions actually today than answers. I have no silver bullet answers. But one thing I would say is our role our role is against a very sort of difficult backdrop. I think, you know, before coming here this morning, I was reading a couple of global surveys that showed Africans are actually some of the most optimistic globally about their economic prospects. But this is despite the consistency in Western media portraying us as a continent, you know, that's just rife with disease, with poverty, with corruption, with famine. I mean, I think many of you know that there's an outbreak of smallpox, you know, happening in the West, in Europe, but all the visual representation of this, you know, outbreak is using people who are African, and that's just one recent example I can put forward. So, what I would say is, how can we, as communicators, come together to sort of change this perspective? We have agency, that's why we're here today, from different countries in the continent. We have communicators, experts, and it's a growing field. As a person in this field for the last, you know, almost 10 years, but, you know, running my agency over the last 6 years, it's a growing field, not only in Rwanda, in the region, but across the continent. How can we gather? And for me, one sort of answer I would give is relentless consistency. The relentlessness in terms of how we are misrepresented, you have to ask yourself why. What purpose does it serve? And how can we combat it? How can we gather together as communicators and put our minds together and see, you know, if we're seeing this misrepresentation in the media, what can we do to counter it? As communicators, I also think it's not just about the bottom line. I think it's not just about you, you know, running a creative agency and looking towards seeing, you know, the bottom line, looking at client-facing work, but how can you look inward as an agency and look at content that you can create? Because you're a creative agency, you have more than 3 heads that sit at a table every morning doing work, but how can you also look at creative work that you can, creative content that you can put out there, but that really has an impact on societal needs, on public discourse, for example. My company is one that, you know, for the last 5 years, we've engaged in content, providing content that contributes to national discourse on very many issues. So as a communicator, one question you should ask yourself as a creative agency is, what are you doing in terms of looking at the trends, global trends, when it comes to the African narrative? Within your capacity, how can you collaborate with others, not only in the country you're from, but also the region, to change this narrative? And most importantly, you know, like I said earlier on, you have to think bigger than your P&L sheets, you know, your financial statements at the end of the year. What more can you do as a creative agency, as a communication expert, in collaboration with others to change this narrative? So those are my opening remarks to your question. It's more, how can we gather, looking at this backdrop of misrepresentation? One thing I would say is relentless consistency in the work that we do to counter this, with an aspect of collaboration. That's really our role to kick off with. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I definitely, and I think the room also definitely heard your message loud and clear on consistency. And this is something that collectively we can definitely do together. You know, in discussions like this, there's always someone somewhere asking, who's going to ask, yes, but why should we even focus on communication when the African continent, you know, is facing so many other issues and you know, and challenges anyway. So let's save time. I'll be that person now. And this question is for you, Emmanuel. As an academic, how do we respond to that? How do we position strategic communication as a key element for agency and ultimately for economic transformation?
First of all, thank you so much for the organizers of this platform and for inviting me and giving me this platform. That's a big question, so I don't know how to tackle this, but I would say communication is quite important, not because it communicates what's there, but because it also creates the reality. I think once upon a time when people talked about Africa, the image that came in people's mind, especially people from overseas, are the hungry kids in Somalia. And I think for a long period, we used to see these images, and we kind of thought that's what Africa is all about. So it creates the reality of Africa because that's how people see Africa. That's how people relate to Africa. That's how Africans ourselves see ourselves. And if we see ourselves like that, from those lenses, it's quite difficult for us to transcend it and actually think about something positive. Now, talking about looking at communication as a central force that drives us is quite important, because if we think about it as something that comes after, we're not creating the reality we want to live. We're not interacting with people. We're not telling our stories. We're not giving these stories the power that they need to create the reality that we want to live. So most of the times when I interact with students, don't know if we, okay.
Shall we?
So most of the times when I interact with students, I think when we talk about storytelling, they think about telling stories. And sometimes it's difficult to shift from telling stories and actually bring them to the aspect of storytelling, because we don't know our stories. We don't understand our stories. So my take on how strategic communication is important and central comes when we're talking about development, when we're talking about who we are, when we're talking about where we're coming from and where we want to be or where we want to go. They tend to think about Africa from the perspective of the West. The examples they give, the companies they talk about, they are all from overseas. And I'm like, we are all African. We are in a university called African Leadership University, but we spend time discussing about Silicon Valley rather than Savannah something, or rather than South Africa, our neighbors. And I'm like, isn't it problematic? And then after some time, I realized even in my course content, I tell stories about the West. And I'm like, we need to wake up. So it was a wake-up call. So we need to think about communication as something that creates our reality rather than something that accompanies or that vehicles a message. It creates, so it's central.
Kiro, you wanted to react to that?
Yeah, great. I wanted to quickly add to that to say about strategic communication and why it's important. I personally feel like the most important thing that any organization can do is actually strategic communication. I used to be the CEO of a music streaming company back in the day, and I found that my role as CEO was actually comms. And I wish more CEOs understood that. I read every book on the planet about being, an effective CEO. And the most effective CEOs are actually strategic communication experts, because what that means is like you're just going to figure out how to communicate with your stakeholders. And that's if you're a government, if you're a CEO, if you're a private sector, if you're whatever you are, even as an individual, how do you speak to your stakeholders? So if you're a mother at home or a parent, your stakeholders are your kids, the people you buy food from in the market, so you have to have negotiating power. The people that at your church, you have to know how to negotiate with them. It's the same thing in the private sector, it's the same thing in government. How do you communicate with your stakeholders? As a CEO, you're communicating with your investors, you're communicating with your customers, you're communicating with your bankers. If you don't do it effectively, that loan will be pulled back. If you don't do it effectively, you lose your house. If you don't do it effectively, and that's just, it's in simple form, the most effective role for any government or any CEO, anybody who's a serious organization, is actually strategic communication and stakeholder engagement. So I think sort of like just putting it in context, comms is something that is essential for humans to actually do well and excel. And that's what Africa actually needs to understand. Just sort of wanted to butt in on that.
That's a very valid point. Basically, the idea is to put as much effort as the other side, whatever that other side is or represents. And we all know firsthand that Africa is regularly framed as this vast space. It's acted upon, there's no proper agenda, or it's unclear. We've all seen these recent articles, probably about Russian information wars taking place on the continent, and Western organizations obviously coming to our rescue. There are tons of stories out there about Africa that needs to wake up to the climate emergency, or not to mention the proverbial West versus China competition on the continent. So it's always as if, Africa is, just a battleground or a bystander. And clearly this is a topic that we can look at from, various angles, and every one of you, the four of you, have just done that. And before we open the floor for a couple of questions, because I'm cautious of time as well, I'd like to hear your views very briefly, all of you, and I hope Mimi is still online, but very briefly on the opportunities, because we talked about, we know the challenges, we know the big picture. What are the opportunities for communication professionals? What are the opportunities for the communication industry? You've all covered parts of those aspects already, but what do you see as the next immediate opportunity for us together, who are listening to, and people who are listening to us now online? What is that one thing that you feel we can do to really boost Africa's agency on the global stage? Who wants to start? Is Mimi still online? Can I ask?
I'm still here.
Oh, you're still there. Sure, we can hear you.
Great.
You want to go ahead?
Brilliant. Yeah, I'm happy to go ahead. I think, just picking up on what Kiri said before I go into your question, one of the things I always tell my clients is that, you're communicating anyway. So communications for me is the art of persuasion. So we're all constantly, what we do as human beings is we're constantly persuading each other to either see our point of view or to see somebody else's point of view, but we're constantly persuading each other towards something. So strategic communications is just doing that with more purpose. So it goes without saying, I think sometimes we overcomplicate, specifically when we're speaking to our stakeholders, what communications is really all about, is that, it's what you do every day, but you're actually doing it and just being more purposeful and deliberate about it. Also just wanted to emphasize on the point that was made by one of the panelists earlier about it not being mutually exclusive. So it's not we build successful businesses as communicators, or we communicate for positive impact. We can do both. We have to start thinking about how to include African development issues, the narrative of the continent, etc., in our business model, and that's a challenge for us communicators wherever we are. But just to go back to your question, I think that you spoke earlier, Annie, about how you created this platform to essentially break down the silos in which communicators were working across the globe. I think in real life, private sector, government, social impact sector, global development actors, etc., are still very much working in silos when it comes to communications. So when you think about the big issues of our time, climate change, gender equity, economic and cultural emancipation, the fluidity of our borders, decolonizing education, etc. Some of the work that I've been doing most recently with our clients has been centered around sustainability and specifically the issue of climate change. And I've been challenging my stakeholders, both from government and from private sector, and saying, you know what, actually, when I look at the world stage at the moment, the people who are really shaping the narrative at a level that is completely phenomenal for me are people who are in the creative industry. I mean, who thought that one day we'd wake up and there'll be a Billboard charts, you know, an Afrobeats Billboard charts will be selling out stadiums in London, in Madison Square. I mean, it's just really incredible how our artists, our musicians, our actors, our designers, our architects, and all these creative minds that are coming from the continent, our writers, are really step by step changing the narrative of the continent. And so when I speak to my clients in government and in private sector, I'm saying, you're doing a great job. They're doing probably an even better job in terms of changing the narrative of the continent. Where is the collaboration? At what point can we actually bring everybody into a room? You know, get Burna Boy and WizKid and, you know, all of these guys into a room and say, guys, how can you use your platforms to speak about issues that affect the continent? How can we get you to come up with ideas on how we collaborate with private sector and how we collaborate with the governments across the continent to speak about the fluidity of our borders and how we need to trade across borders, etc. So I do think that, you know, there's almost a re-education of our clients' frameworks of and how they work and how they think about communications, to challenge them to go beyond their comfort zones. I'm reminded of what Malcolm Gladwell said in one of his books around leveraging your strengths. Sometimes we spend way too much time trying to strengthen our weaknesses as opposed to leveraging the strengths that we already have to go even further. And I think the creative industries for me is one area that's absolutely fascinating and that other sectors, private and government, are not leveraging to tell really impactful African stories.
Thanks, Mimi. So more collaboration, building on our strengths and leveraging them. That's a very clear opportunity for our sector. And Kiru, do you want to go next?
Yes, sure, I'll go next. So Mimi, it's like we need to actually be partnering. Why aren't we working together again? Like, so literally she just said everything. And actually, in essence, that's what we are doing at the Africa Soft Power Project, because we're focused on advancing the stories around creativity and innovation. How do we use Africa's creativity and innovation to propel Africa forward? How do we create African thought leaders and diasporan thought leaders on a global stage? When you think about all the things you know about climate change or sustainability or really anything that sort of is in global conversation, what are the African voices? Just really think about it. Who can you point to as an African voice that is saying all the things that the world is saying? We don't actually really have that. But we have a lot of amazing people, but we're not propelling ourselves in the way we should be. Our governments are not actually effective. I mean, someone has to say it. We have not been effective as governments, African governments, and that's what the point is. But also, something that Mimi said, that Mimi slightly don't agree on one point, just one little point. It's not for Burna Boy or for WizKid or for Soti Soul or for anybody actually to do more than they already are doing. It is for the governments, African governments, for African private sector to recognize what these kids are doing and support them to propel more forward. We don't need Burna Boy going on a stage and saying, oh, solve world peace or solve climate change. He's already doing it by being on that stage. What African governments, African leadership needs to do, what African private sector needs to do is invest more in the youth so that we have more people propelling Africa forward. So they don't need to do more than they're already doing. They're doing enough. We just need to get more out there.
Thank you. And speaking of, you know, the creative industries and their role in pushing our narrative, we can also mention other industries like, you know, sports sector, clearly, because that also has a lot of influence at the international level. You mentioned the lack of African voices in, you know, public fora on the global stage. There's experts on Africa that will be launched this week through Africa Comes Week. So I really encourage you to go out there and to go to our website and register for this incredible initiative. It's being launched by our friend Uzo Madu, who's also part of Josely of our network, Africa Communications Week, and she's had this amazing initiative and really is bringing this to the fore this week. So I just wanted to point that out as well. Diana, just for the conclusion, please.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of things. I think your question early on was on opportunities, for all of us, most of us seated in this room. First of all, I think one, in a I don't want to say post-COVID, but the last 2 years have showed us the power of digital networks, of digital fora, and a lot of people are using them, these platforms, more than ever before. How can we tap into this if we're going to look at changing the narrative? And they've become more accessible, these platforms across the continent. All you need is a phone, to get your story across. But as communicators, how can we even leverage these platforms more than ever, like deliberately understanding the power of digital platforms? The second thing I have as more as food for thought is between communicators and media practitioners. There's a thin line. And I've worked as a journalist before, but right now I am full-time in the creative industry as running a creative agency. How do we what I'm trying to say is, how do we use the power of journalists when it comes to conveying information or contributing to the narrative of Africa on the global stage in different political spheres on different topics, and how do we as communicators, with the creative outputs, with the creative, and here I'm talking about production, whether it's contributing to opinion editorials, whether it's making beautiful audiovisual content that goes viral, because we have the capacity to do that. We're behind the camera, we're behind the photography, we're behind the editing, and then you have journalists who are in the newsroom. How do we connect? That is, I find that a vital question. And how do we do that against the backdrop of investment from the African private sector? So that's my food for thought. How do those two intersect? Because that for me is an opportunity. It's just the how. And how do we do that looking at deliberate investment from private sector? We're looking at MNOs that are here. We are looking, even from sports bodies like the BAL. If we want to tell a certain story, how can we do it intersecting with investment from different private sector, huge bodies, and I feel that's an opportunity that we can tap into and get clear, solid answers. And I'm optimistic that if we do that deliberately, we can see a sort of trend or making a dent into these issues that we're talking about, even in the next, less than 5 years. So that's something I'd look forward to, something I'd look forward to talking to with people in this room, sorry, in the next coming days as part of Africa Comms Week. Thank you.
Awesome, and tons of open questions that we definitely need to address. So, Emmanuel, you've heard the practitioners. We'd like to hear, from your academic point of view, what is the next opportunity for the sector?
I think the opportunities is actually revisiting what stories are and how we can create these stories and how we can come together to create these stories. Because from overseas, we are portrayed as the dark continent. They never talk about dark Congo, they never talk about dark Rwanda, but they talk about the dark continent. So how do we all come together to show the light from Africa? How do you create consistent, appealing content that is useful to the people outside, that they can consume? Because when I had a chance of traveling some time back, people told me about Hotel Rwanda. So they saw me through Hotel Rwanda. So because it was good content that was created that they had access to. So the opportunity is about collaboration, as Mimi and everybody on the panel said. How do we collaborate? How do we invest in collaboration? How do we create good content? How do we change the narrative? How do we create the narrative? How do you rediscover the narrative? And how do we propel comms and leverage social media and reach our audiences with fresh content? So I think those are a lot of opportunities, and I think it has all been said, I think.
This is awesome. I don't know what you think, and I'm sure this panel discussion probably triggered quite a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I'm going to ask you to keep those questions to yourself. And really, I want to encourage you to interact and network a lot in the coming hours. We have a whole afternoon to keep dissecting that topic in working groups. So obviously, the conversation doesn't end here. I'm really looking forward to this. I definitely enjoyed this panel discussion. I want to invite you to join me in really giving them a round of applause. So now I think Adedoyin, you will take the floor. I was very pleased with this discussion. Unfortunately, it was not as interactive as we had planned, but I think we can see clearly the contours of how communication, and most importantly, us communicators, can really play our part in boosting Africa's agency on the global stage. So really looking forward to the rest of the day and discussing with all of you. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Annie. Please, a bigger round of applause for Annie and all of our panelists. It was a very fantastic conversation. Yes, you can step down. Thank you very much, all our panelists. So we're moving right ahead now. We have a presentation from the African Media Agency, and it is an integrated communications agency that unifies PR, creative, and digital marketing to create strategic, content-rich communications campaigns that inspire action and also builds value. And they're going to be presenting to us today the African Media Agency Online Academy, which was recently launched, and we're going to hear all about it. And it's run by a very fantastic communications professional called Eluin Barry. So I'm going to hand over now for them to do their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Adeline, for introducing us. Eric Jonathan Sebgo, Digital and Marketing Manager at African Media Agency, with my colleague, Amy Mini, which is based in Durban, South Africa. Me, I'm out of Ivory Coast. This morning, we'll be presenting African Media Agency AMA Academy, which is a platform that we created for journalists that are based in the continent. But firstly, when Eluin Barry created the company, she had in mind three main objectives. The first one was to shift the narrative, because the way we perceive Africa in the mainstream media was like Africa is the continent of charity, Africa is the continent of poverty. So we needed to change this to highlight the continent, which is powerful, which is vibrant, which is rich. Secondly, we wanted to create more jobs, opportunities in the continent for the youth. And thirdly, we wanted to empower journalists in the continent. And I think it's here that AMA Academy comes. So AMA Academy is a free learning platform dedicated to African journalists. The platform offered classes in French, English, Arabic, and Portuguese. And for, thank you for the slide. Yeah. So next slide, please. Unless I can take control. Yeah, thank you. So while brainstorming, we noticed that African media was facing too many challenges. For example, censorship, intimidation and violence, lack of training, competition from global media houses. And we wanted to empower journalists for them to have the capabilities to face the competition and to be able to also, for African people to trust the local news. That's why we created AMA Academy. Next slide, please. So AMA Academy is, as I was saying, a learning platform for networking, job, grant opportunities dedicated to journalists in Africa. So since now we've partnered with experts in the media industry and media innovation to like teach journalists to adapt to the actual requirements of the industry. Next slide, please. So the mission of the academy, first and foremost, is to upskill and certify journalists. We are now in the technological world, and we know that with the evolution, things are changing. So journalists need to be on top of the different changes. That's why we decided to launch the academy. Also, every journalist for us is an entrepreneur. So we need to be aware of ways of monetizing his content. That's why the main classes of this first cohort was about content monetization. Also, the academy provides a network to the journalists. For example, journalists in Ivory Coast has been able to connect with another one from South Africa, for example, so that they can just meet, share the different challenges they face, how they can like use the other experience to try to succeed in his way. So, and finally, career advancement and opportunities to aggregate job offers and media grant opportunities on the platform, so journalists can know that not only African Media Agency, but there are plenty of opportunities for them out of the way, and then we just created the hub for them to find it easy. Next slide, please. So the objective of the academy is to provide training to 10,000 journalists and media professionals by 2027. We want also to transfer skills across the continent. That's why we partner with institutions that are helping us training these journalists. We also want to grow the media industry by creating a bridge between communication professional and media practitioners. I think one of the speakers of the previous panel discussion was highlighting it, how as communication professionals try to create the link with the journalists. And I think this is what we are trying to answer here with the academy. And finally, we want to create an homegrown narrative. As I was saying, firstly, Africa was always depicted as the continent of poverty, the continent that needed help. But we want to change the things for African, firstly, to know that the continent is not a charity one, but we are about to change things. So we launched the academy on March 15, and at the end of the month of March, when we closed the registration, we had 200 journalists that registered. And these 200 journalists were from 23 countries. The countries are highlighted in the map in red, in pink, please. And so we partnered with Axel Springer and other organizations to deliver the classes. And as I was saying, journalists are entrepreneurs, and at the end of the first class on web monetization, they were keen on having another class for them to really understand the opportunities that are available for them. So we decided to host another session on web monetization. So the academy is providing classes to the journalists. Next, please. And here is a snapshot of attendance. So we have journalists from all over the continent that are registered for the first cohort of the academy. So, for example, we have journalists from Zimbabwe, from Nigeria, from Cameroon, from Ivory Coast, from DRC. So the continent is represented. I will now pass on the floor to my colleague Amy, which will run you through the next slide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you to AfricaComs Week for giving us this platform and allowing us to introduce you to Emma Academy. My name is Amy. I'm the sales consultant for Africa Media Agency, and it's lovely to meet you all. Please may I have the next slide? So just to carry on with what Eric was saying, this is the curriculum that we've put together as part of cohort 1 for the academy, and there's been a strong focus on web monetization, just so that we can provide practical tools that the journalists can use, because we want them to monetize their craft, which is writing. So there's been a lot of interest on what they can do and how we can navigate them with monetizing. We did a class on fact-checking, and we have upcoming classes on investigative journalism, creative writing, as well as a speed date with Yinka Adegote. And you can see who the classes are hosted by. We try our best to leverage our relationships with industry experts so that we can get the best training and best skills for our journalists. Can I have the next slide, please? These are our current partners, so it's a lot of different things and people from lots of different industries, and we are excited to also introduce new partners as we go forward. Can I have the next slide, please? So we've been in the process of inviting organizations to be part of our journey. We've leveraged relationships with experts. We've challenged our clients as well to participate. We've handpicked industries that we want to work with, so that we know that things that weren't being communicated on in the last 10 years, journalists can be upskilled and taught about it. So we believe journalists should learn from experts and examine important issues that impact Africa, whether those issues are social, political, or environmental. We want our journalists to have the right tools and know which questions to ask and how to write on these various topics. Can I have the next slide, please? So we are in the process of looking for partners, and we are speaking to companies every single day, just trying to see what opportunities we can create with them to create trainings and to make sure that the sessions are impactful and that we're getting our journalists the tools that they need. So we when we look for partners on training, it could be anything from if a company or organization wants to select a group of journalists, so it could be women only, you could select a topic, and then we would find the right experts or faculty, and then we'd try and run recurring training so that we could establish relationships. So the kind of relationships that we're building now are where we could have the same person come back and do 3 or 4 sessions, just so that we get used to their style of teaching and we get to optimize on whatever they can teach us. May I have the next slide, please? We've also encouraged a lot of our clients to sponsor a media award, just so that we could recognize the journalists that are attending. You saw on the slides previously that there's journalists from 23 countries across Africa, and there's a huge appetite for the training, and it's been it's been very rewarding to watch the training, and we also want to add more value to it by organizing an award. So if you wanted to sponsor a media award as a company while partnering with us, you could recognize a journalist in a particular category, perhaps the industry that you're in. We could organize a physical event around it and create a pool of journalists that are at the core of your communications or company's objectives. Please, may I have the next slide? We also have in-kind sponsorship for media, because media across the continent lack resources. The sponsorship is tailored to companies who equip some newsrooms across the continent in exchange for brand visibility and the certificates received by our journalists. We work mostly in a value exchange, and we are happy to meet with any industry professionals and companies who would like to give back to the journalists, just so that we can upskill them and they can also have the necessary tools needed to be better equipped at their jobs. The last slide. We invite companies and organizations, communications agencies as well, to help us help African journalism thrive. Thank you so much for attending the presentation with us today. My name is Eric, and I'm with my colleague Eric. My name is Amy. Did I say my name is Eric? My name is Amy, and I'm with my colleague Eric, and we are from African Media Agency, and we are so grateful to have this platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy and Eric. And thank you, Amy, that was such a laugh, that last one. Thank you so much for that presentation. and beautiful work that you're doing, and I hope that you'll be able to find partners and supporters in the room. I hope it's been a rewarding morning for us, and it's time for lunch. Who is excited about lunch? It's going to be a time to network. Yeah, I see hands. It's going to be a time to network, and it's also going to be a time to interact as well as we prepare for the second half. The live streaming is going to stop briefly during the lunch time. However, remember that the Africa Communications Week is going on with several events that you can key into. So you can just visit www.africacommunicationsweek.com to see the full lineup of events and join conversations from professionals across the continent and even in the diaspora. For those of us right here in the room who are getting ready to eat lunch, we're going to be handed out coupons. So make sure you have a coupon before you go, and then have a good time, meet somebody, interact with people. Remember, we're speaking about collaborations. So this is a good time to form new collaborations and new networks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Can we get a round of applause for our MC this morning? Thank you. How are you doing? I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. So definitely after lunch, continue to stick around, but also for our participants here in Rwanda and visiting or based here in Rwanda, just a reminder, if you did not fill out your activity sign up, please do, or come see me, because we do have an invite for Africa Soft Power Conference, which Nkiru was talking about. So everybody who did register for here is invited to attend that for the next 3 days. And BAL has also invited us to the Innovation Summit tomorrow, and tickets for everybody to go to the evening games tomorrow. So please make sure you see me if you have not signed up yet. Bon appetit.